Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're exploring a side of history you might not typically associate with classical music, but it's really essential to understanding the world one of the greatest composers lived in.
hmm
Our source material for this dive is an article from Popular Beethoven magazine titled Prostitution in Beethoven's Europe.
Yeah, it sounds a bit surprising coming from a Beethoven magazine, doesn't it?
It does, but it really highlights that to truly know an era, you kind of have to look at all its facets, even the, well, uncomfortable ones.
Absolutely.
We're not here to make judgments, but really just to unpack what this article tells us about daily life, social structures, economics in Europe during the late 18th and early 19th centuries.
Exactly. And this Popular Beethoven magazine article, it offers a really insightful perspective. It tackles a complex social phenomenon that was, well, undeniably pervasive across Europe then. We'll use the article to look at how different countries approached it, uh, focusing in on Vienna, and then see what the source reveals about how this potentially connected to Beethoven himself.
Mhm.
It's all about gaining historical context, directly from the material presented.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. We're going to start with the broader European picture the article paints, then zoom into Vienna, Beethoven City, look at a specific major event there, and finally, tackle that intriguing question the article poses about the composer. Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay, so the article starts by setting the scene. Prostitution in Beethoven's era, we're talking roughly late 1700s through early 1800s. It was a widespread but pretty complex reality across Europe,
Right.
deeply woven into urban environments, often driven by economic factors.
Yeah.
What's really striking is how much the attitudes and the official responses varied from place to place.
And the article gives some really clear examples of that variation. So what happens when we look at France, say, under Napoleon?
Well, France took a really notable turn towards regulation. The source highlights decrees starting around 1802, mandating health inspections. This was largely driven by fears about syphilis.
Okay. Public health.
Exactly. And by 1804, they'd officially organized Maison de Tolérance, basically licensed brothels.
Licensed brothels. So the state wasn't just trying to, stamp it out.
No, not at all. The article says this system explicitly acknowledged prostitution's perceived inevitability.
Interesting.
The focus shifted to public health control and, well, managing the trade rather than outright prohibition. And this regulatory model, it actually ended up influencing other regions too.
That's fascinating, the state deciding it's better to manage it. The numbers the article gives for Paris around this time are also pretty eye-opening, aren't they?
They really are. The source estimates something like 30,000 regular prostitutes plus maybe another 10,000 high-class courtesans
Wow.
in a population of about 600,000. So that could be roughly 6% of the total population. And the article even suggests it might have been as high as 13% of the female population.
13% of the female population in Paris potentially involved. That's a massive scale, especially operating, partly anyway, under state oversight.
It really is. Now, how does that compare to England? Did they take a similar path?
Good question. Was it the same across the channel?
And not really, no. The article contrasts the earlier 18th century view in England, where it was often seen as a kind of a tolerated necessity.
Tolerated necessity. How so?
Well, for male sexuality on one hand, and frankly, a means of survival for many poor women on the other. But by the early 19th century, you see this significant shift driven by rising evangelical moralism.
The moral climate changed.
Right. And that shift led towards criminalization.
Criminalization, okay.
The source points to the Vagrancy Act of 1824 as a key example.
Yeah.
It specifically targeted common prostitutes with some pretty harsh penalties, like imprisonment with hard labor.
So a completely opposite approach then. Regulate in France, criminalize in England. What insight does the article offer about the effect of these different legal approaches? Did criminalization actually work?
Well, that raises a really important question about visibility versus reality. The article uses some mid-19th century London stats to illustrate this.
Okay.
Police reports listed about 8,600 known prostitutes. But because it was criminalized, many, many more were operating covertly. Unofficial estimates, the article says, went up as high as 80,000.
80,000, that's a staggering difference.
It is a huge potential gap between the official records and the likely reality when you push something underground.
Right.
So the article uses a sort of midpoint estimate, around 35,000 prostitutes in London's population of about 1 million at the time. That gives a ratio of maybe 3.5% of the total population, or around 7% of the female population.
Oh, very significant numbers.
Definitely. And what's insightful here, as the article points out, is how the state's approach seems to directly shape the visibility of the trade. Outright bans, like in England, didn't necessarily make it disappear. They just made it more hidden, harder to track compared to regulated systems like France's.
That's a crucial point. The law changes how we see it, but maybe not its actual presence. Did the article mention other parts of Europe briefly?
It did, yeah. German states often sort of mirrored France's regulatory model, licensing, health checks, that kind of thing.
Okay.
More conservative areas, particularly within the Habsburg Empire, which included Vienna, of course, often tried outright suppression. But the article notes this was frequently unsuccessful.
So a real mix of strategies across the continent, but the underlying reality seems pretty consistent. It was there, everywhere.
Exactly. And the article adds this interesting little detail. Comparative studies suggest that smaller European cities might have had lower ratios, maybe 0.5% to 1% of the population.
Ah, okay. So the big capitals were really the hotspots.
Seems that way. It helps put the larger numbers for Paris and London into context. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see this landscape of widely varying legal and social approaches across Europe, but underneath it all, a consistent reality of prostitution being a significant, often hidden, part of urban life.
That broad European picture is fascinating, highlighting those different approaches. But let's bring it home now to the city Beethoven knew best, where he spent most of his life. Vienna.
Right, Vienna.
The article explains Vienna, as the Habsburg capital and a Catholic stronghold, had its own complicated relationship with prostitution, heavily influenced by both the empire and the church.
It absolutely did. The source details some pretty intense earlier attempts at suppression. Empress Maria Theresa, for instance, established the Chastity Committee back in 1752.
The Chastity Committee sounds serious.
It was. And it wasn't just about prostitution. It aggressively targeted all sorts of behaviors deemed immoral.
And the measures they used were harsh, according to the article.
Very harsh. What's fascinating here is the severity. The article mentions the deportation of an estimated 3,000 women to a place called Temesvar that's in modern-day Romania, just between 1744 and 1768.
Wow, deporting 3,000 women? That's extreme. Why such intensity in Vienna compared to, say, regulated Paris? What was driving that?
Well, the article suggests that it was deeply tied to Vienna's identity as this major Catholic capital and the influence of very conservative imperial and clerical authorities. They favored moral Puritanism over maybe a more pragmatic approach.
I see.
But even with that pressure, it persisted. The Emperor Joseph II later brought some changes. He abolished some of the harshest public punishments, like shaming.
Okay, a slight softening maybe?
A bit. But crucially, prostitution remained illegal under criminal law in Vienna all the way up until the mid-19th century, well into Beethoven's time and beyond.
So still technically illegal, but thriving anyway. How did that work?
Well, the article notes that, much like elsewhere, it was primarily driven by sheer economic necessity for the women involved and consistent urban demand from men. It thrived in specific known areas, the Prater Park, Spittelberg, parts of the inner city, despite its illegal status.
So people knew where to go even if it wasn't officially sanctioned?
Pretty much, yes.
And to give us a sense of the scale in Beethoven's specific time, the article uses some later figures and then kind of works backward, right?
Right. It mentions later records from 1874 showing over 6,400 registered prostitutes and maybe another 12,000 unregistered. That's in a population of around 900,000.
Okay, that's later on.
Yeah. Then, for Beethoven's time, when Vienna's population was closer to 250,000, maybe 300,000, the article estimates that a similar proportion likely existed. That puts the ratio at around 2% of the total population.
Okay, so around 2% of the total population in Beethoven's Vienna, based on the article's estimate. Still sounds like a significant number, even if maybe lower than the estimates for Paris or London.
It is significant, and this perception of its widespread nature, even under legal restrictions, is captured perfectly by this witty quote the article attributes to Emperor Joseph II.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading this when someone suggested licensing brothels.
Exactly. He reportedly shot back, "The expense of roofing would be ruinous, for it would be necessary to put a roof over the whole city."
Huh, that's brilliant.
Isn't it? But it's more than just a funny line. It really illustrates that gap the article highlights between the official law and the lived reality in Beethoven's Vienna. It shows just how prevalent everyone knew it was, even though it was technically illegal.
That quote really does bring it to life. Okay, now let's just focus slightly. Let's look at how a specific massive event in Vienna might have impacted this whole scene, the Congress of Vienna.
Ah, yes, the Congress.
This ran from September 1814 to June 1815. As the article describes, it was this huge diplomatic gathering to basically reshape Europe after Napoleon's defeat, often called the Dancing Congress, right? Because of the constant parties and social events.
Absolutely. It brought over 200 delegations, emperors, kings, diplomats, their entourages, swelling Vienna's population by perhaps a third almost overnight.
Wow.
This kind of massive influx, combined with that intense high-stakes social scene, naturally amplified the demand for, well, all sorts of services. The article notes historical accounts describing the city as just rife with love affairs and romantic entanglements. And it specifically mentions the presence of high-class prostitutes catering to this temporary, wealthy, powerful clientele alongside others.
Okay, so a huge surge in demand. And this is where the article gives that absolutely astonishing statistic for this specific period.
It really is astonishing. For this period, during the Congress months, the article puts forward an estimate. Yeah. It suggests it's likely that 20%.
20.
Yes, 20% of the city's female population, acknowledging it was partially temporary, might have been involved in prostitution during the Congress.
20%. I mean, that's incredible. That's 10 times higher than the article's estimate for Vienna under normal circumstances.
It's a truly dramatic figure, isn't it? It just underscores the unique, almost feverish impact an event like the Congress of Vienna had on the social dynamics and, frankly, the economy of the city.
Absolutely mind-blowing. Okay, so we've seen the broad European picture, the specifics of Vienna, the dramatic effect of a major event like the Congress. Now let's get to the question this popular Beethoven magazine article specifically explores. Did Beethoven himself visit prostitutes?
Right. The article places this question squarely in the context of Beethoven's life in the early 1810s. This was a particularly difficult period for him.
How so?
His deafness was worsening significantly, leading to increasing isolation. He was grappling with profound loneliness, which comes through very strongly in his letters and his diary entries from that time.
A really tough time for him personally.
Extremely. And the article states that it was during this period, around 1813, that he did begin frequenting prostitutes. It notes this was a relatively common, if often discreet practice among unmarried men, bachelors, in Vienna at the time.
Okay. And the evidence for this comes directly from him. The article highlights coded letters to his friend, right? Baron Zmeskal, another bachelor.
Yes, exactly. These letters offer direct, albeit coded, insight. The article explains Beethoven used terms like rotten fortresses, Festen to refer to prostitutes.
Rotten fortresses, that's quite a term.
It is. And the article suggests this loaded term alluded to both their sort of temptation or allure and also, very significantly, the real dangers of venereal disease, which was rampant.
Okay, so temptation and danger rolled into one phrase. The quotes the article uses are really revealing about his mindset here, aren't they?
They really are. He wrote things to Zmeskal like, be zealous in defending the fortresses of the empire, which, as you know, lost their virginity a long time ago and have already received several assaults.
Wow. Referring to them as sort of conquered or available territory.
Seems like it. And he used the term again, didn't he?
Yeah, there's another one. Enjoy life, but not voluptuously proprietor, governor, pasha, various rotten fortresses.
You can almost feel the kind of bravado mixed with maybe something darker there. A sort of possessiveness, perhaps.
But also a clear warning, as the article points out.
Definitely. And perhaps most tellingly, he advised Zmeskal, keep away from rotten fortresses, for an attack from them is more deadly than one from well-preserved ones.
That explicitly links the term to the health risks involved. Syphilis, again, presumably.
Almost certainly, yes.
So it's clear from these letters he was engaging in this. But the article also talks about the intense internal conflict this caused him, right? How it clashed with his often very idealized views of love and women.
Precisely. The article really delves into his Tage book, his personal diary, from this exact period. And these entries, they reveal profound remorse, self-recrimination about these encounters.
And the diary quotes the article shares are quite raw, aren't they?
Very much so. He wrote things like, sensual gratification without a spiritual union is and remains bestial. Afterwards, one has no trace of noble feeling, but rather remorse.
That's incredibly harsh on himself.
It is, and there's another entry, a direct vow to himself. From today on, never go into that house without shame at craving something from such a person.
Powerful words, showing a really deep struggle. Did the article suggest he ever reconciled this conflict within himself?
It shows him grappling with it intellectually as well, which is fascinating. The article mentions he also considered the inevitability of human desire. He noted that sovereign reason should guide these urges.
So trying to rationalize it almost.
Maybe. And incredibly, the article points out he even copied a passage from a Hindu text into his diary. It was a defense of natural bodily functions, he quoted. To someone who was offended by the idea of the lingam phallus, the Brahmin uttered, "Did not the same God who has created the eye also create the other human members?"
Wow, that's an incredible detail. He was really wrestling with this on multiple levels, moral, spiritual, even philosophical, seeking wisdom from ancient texts.
It truly shows the depth of his internal struggle, doesn't it? His complex thinking about desire, morality, the body. The source concludes this section by noting that these fleeting encounters, they really didn't provide him the relief from isolation he seemed to be seeking.
No comfort there.
Apparently not. Instead, they seemed to deepen his self-disgust. And the article mentions that friends described his appearance during this time as deteriorated. He looked run down, rough, even repulsive, some said. His visits, documented in his own words, really highlight a man deeply torn between his physical needs and his often unattainable spiritual and romantic ideals.
A really human and quite tragic picture emerges. So, stepping back, what does all of this tell us, drawing from this popular Beethoven magazine article? What are the main takeaways?
Well, I think it tells us first that prostitution was a pervasive, complex, and frankly significant part of daily life across Europe in Beethoven's era. Just unavoidable context.
Right.
Second, it was handled very differently by various states. You had France's regulation, England's criminalization, the Habsburgs' often ineffective suppression attempts, but it was consistently present. Third, Vienna, despite prostitution being officially illegal, had a substantial scene, one that could be dramatically amplified during huge events like the Congress of Vienna. That 20% figure is unforgettable. And finally, perhaps most revealingly for our context, the source shows us that even a figure we often elevate to near-mythical status, like Beethoven, was personally touched by this reality. His struggles, documented through his own coded letters and private diary, highlight his profound loneliness and his intense internal moral conflict.
And why is it valuable for you, our listener, to dive into this specific topic, prompted by a popular Beethoven magazine article?
Good question.
Because understanding these social and economic realities of the time, even the parts that feel distant or uncomfortable to us today, it gives us a much richer, more complete picture of the world historical figures like Beethoven actually lived in.
It grounds them.
Exactly. It helps us see them not just as, composers in powdered wigs or names in history books, but as complex human beings navigating the very real, often messy complexities of their era. It adds depth and, I think, humanity to our understanding of their lives, their struggles, and the society that shaped them.
Well said.
That was a truly deep dive into a surprising, but I think really important corner of Beethoven's world and the European society of his time. All thanks to this fascinating article from popular Beethoven magazine.
It certainly provides a lot to think about, doesn't it? About the realities of that time and the often quite difficult personal lives lived within those structures.
Definitely. So here's a final thought for you to consider based on everything we've just unpacked from this article. Given how pervasive and complex these issues were, economic necessity driving women, social control through laws and morality, fundamental human desire, all creating this landscape of prostitution in Beethoven's Europe. How do you think these historical realities continue to echo in or shape discussions about similar issues today? What does that continuity, or perhaps the changes, tell us about persistent human challenges across the centuries?
Something to ponder.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.